السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه واتبع هداه وبعد. Welcome everybody to our Seeking Shade program tonight. I have good news and bad news. Let's start with the bad news first, and then we'll end with the good news. The bad news is that we all face difficulties in life. No matter how old we are, even little babies trying to stand up, they keep trying, falling and standing up, to teenagers, to youth, to adults. And we experience that at different times and in different ways and at different levels. You might have heard the quote, life is pain. Anyone telling you differently is selling something. And there is some truth in this, but the Quran is not selling anything. The Quran says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We created man in difficulty. So the idea of facing difficulties should be expected. And that is why the good news is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in a way that we can build resilience. And this is what we'll be talking about tonight, inshallah. What is resilience? Resilience is the ability to bounce back when the storms are beating against us. This is what we mean by resilience, bouncing back. If you want to visualize what resilience is, think about your car absorber. Without it, your ride will be very, very hard. So that is why we need to build that absorber in our hearts. It could be in the form of beliefs that we need to remind ourselves with. And it could be also in the form of practices that we need to use to cultivate values in our hearts. And these things will build the resilience that makes us be able to face the difficulties of life. And the topic tonight is limited to the idea of fasting. How fasting alone could help us build that sense of resilience. And as I said, we need it. When I said bad news, it's not literally bad news. This is what every human being would face. No one is exempted from this. No one is exempted from facing difficulties. Because we love things and we hate things. And the fact is, things do not always go the way we want. So there will be some points when we'll be disappointed in our life. So that is why all of us need to learn how to be resilient. And the good thing about resilience is that it can be taught. It is true that some of us are born with resilience, but it is also true that we can build it. We can learn it. And it takes some skills and creating some perspectives and in our minds to develop resilience. As I said, as the title of this talk suggests, it's about fasting and how fasting helps us build resilience. Before I start talking about fasting, I want to mention two notes about the spiritual system in Islam. In Islam, we have what you can say mawasim al-ta'a, or seasons of worship. We have what we can say seasons of worship. Things like Ramadan, Umrah, Hajj, the first 10 days of the Hijjah. These are seasons of worship. On YouTube and in social media, I see people making fun of Muslims who become very energized during Ramadan. And that is completely wrong. You have every right to be more active in Ramadan. So when we're talking about seasons of worship, doing extra work during these seasons of worship is not an act of hypocrisy. It's like the rope of hope between us and Allah that we do not want it to be cut. So do not look at those and disregard any comments, any negative comments about you being more active in Ramadan than in other months. Praying more in Ramadan is expected. That is not an act of hypocrisy. It's meant to recharge the battery of faith for the rest of our year. So do not worry about that. The second thing is that these seasons of worship would really bear fruits with one condition. If you approach Allah with undivided heart, and that is a key in general. So what do I mean by undivided heart? With undivided heart, you should connect yourself with your normal circumstances. So for Umrah, for example, if you're going on Umrah and you're still updating your Facebook page, that means that you're not disconnected from this world. Umrah is meant to disconnect you from the world for a while so that you devote all of your heart for Allah and cultivate more connection with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala so that you can encounter this dunya again. But if you go to Umrah and you're still updating your social media status and you're having the same exact relations as before, then the fruits of Umrah will not be as expected. Same thing with Ramadan. You should have some devoted time for worship. And that is these are two general notes on the seasons of worship and the undivided heart. We need it for Ramadan, we need it in Umrah, we need it in every season of worship. Now, what about fasting? I can easily claim that fasting is a resilience exercise. We can easily claim that fasting is a resilience exercise. Fasting is not about starvation. Fasting is not starvation. Fasting is a voluntary abstinence from food and drinks, and you can even enlarge that list. It could be watching TV. You can add watching TV to the list of things that you should not do, but at least we have the minimum that will talk about its significance spiritually. You stay away from food and drinks and relations with your wife from dawn till sunset. And that is done for spiritual and moral reasons. Again, the question directly, and I will be going with points so that it will be easy for everyone to follow. How does fasting build my resilience? The first point is that fasting, as Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali said, fasting teaches us one great lesson, which is, he said it very clearly, and subhanAllah, it clearly relates to what we're talking about. He said, الصيام يعطينا القدرة على الحياة مع الحرمان في صورة ما. He said, fasting gives us the ability to survive even when we are deprived. Because what does it mean when you do not eat and drink for around 18 hours or 16 hours? This is absolute deprivation. Deprivation of the necessary things in your life for survival. You do not find food, you do not find drinks. But even though you're deprived from food and drinks, the basics of life, you still have the ability to survive. So fasting, think of fasting as exactly as I said, a resilience exercise. You know, they do this in wars. So what fasting is doing here is fasting drives you out of your comfort zone and forces you to develop that sense of, forces you to lead a dire and minimal way of life. And that discomfort of hunger is designed to create that discomfort zone for yourself so that you learn ways on how to cope with it. So we basically, in fasting, we rehearse the worst case scenario. It is a training before an actual crisis hits. It's like what they do in armies. They have war games. They stimulate the conditions of war, and then they have the fight to test how ready the soldiers are for fighting. So same exact concept here. You stay away from eating and drinking, and that is very uncomfortable. It's a big trial, someone who doesn't have food and drinks. And the point is to help you cope with times of deprivation. So if what you do in Ramadan is you stay away from these essentials of life from dawn till sunset, what you're doing in Ramadan is that great accomplishment, which is you prove that you have the potential and you have the power to resist these or have the power to cope with the deprivations of life. You have the power to survive when you do not have the basics and the essentials of life. So if you can survive without the basics of life, you can easily survive without the haram. If you survive without eating and drinking for a long period of time, do not tell me you cannot quit smoking, because smoking is not an essential of life. And you prove to yourself that you have the power to stay away from the essentials of life. And if you really can, then you can also stay away from harmful habits like smoking and drugs and anything of that nature. So this is the first point. The idea here in fasting is that fasting drives you out of your comfort zone and puts you in a state of difficulty and proves to you that you have the power to cope with the difficulty and to survive. So this is like a training before any crisis happen. The second thing we learn in fasting is that we stay away from food and drinks, and that what gives energy to the flesh, to the body. And that gives room for your soul to communicate with Allah, and gives room for your heart to have compassion for people. So remember, what is the first thing that relates fasting to resilience? Is that it acknowledges that life is difficult and it puts you in a difficult situation and proves to you that you can. That is the first lesson in general. The second lesson is that it reminds you of your purpose and meaning in life. Because when you have purpose and meaning of life, you can survive difficult situations. Without purpose and meaning in life, it would be really hard to survive these difficulties of life. And what is good about classes like this is that we need to be taught and armed before a problem happens. We need to be armed with how to build resilience before a problem happens. Because when a problem happens, khutbahs and classes, believe me, do not work. You just need a hug. Logic does not work. But it's good at that is why in Salah, what do we do in Salah? We keep saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. What is Subhana? Subhana is to free Allah from evil and any imperfection. So the best translation, in my opinion, for Subhana is holy. Holy be God. What is holy? Holy yani free of sin and any imperfection. Why do we keep saying this? So that your brain will understand everything that happens as coming from the holy. So it's never without purpose. It must have a purpose. We may know the purpose, we may not know the purpose. But the point is to train your heart to entertain this fact that Allah is holy. So we're doing in Ramadan, we're staying away from food and drinks and minimizing our intake of food and drinks so that we give more room for the soul to communicate with Allah and with the heart to have compassion for people when you feel their sufferings. Because here you do not need someone giving you statistics about how many people who are suffering because of hunger. No, you go through it yourself, and you know what hunger means. And it is very easy for you now to connect with people. And when your heart and when your soul is having more room, it can easily communicate with Allah. And that is why fasting helps you build your purpose and meaning in life. And by the way, we all seek meaning. We all seek meaning. Without Allah, there cannot be meaning. Without Allah, there cannot be meaning. That is why when we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the only thing that gives life meaning. Because if there is no God, what would that mean? What is the consequence of saying there is no God? You cannot say there is no God and mashallah you're smart. Now if you say there is no God, it means that everything in this universe, including me and you, is just chemical reactions between atoms that has no meaning, no value, no purpose. So your eyes were not made to see, your brain was not made to think, the sun was not made to function in the way it does. The sunrise was not meant to be beautiful. All of these things are illusions and things you're just giving to other things. So if there is no God, there is basically nothing. If there is no God, there is no man. So again, in fasting, we believe in fasting we give time for our soul to communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for our heart to communicate and to connect with people. And that gives us a sense of purpose and meaning. That is why in order to survive a big problem, you must have a bigger goal, bigger purpose, and bigger meaning in life. So that is the only thing that can help you bounce back when a problem hits. This is one of the great things that helps us bounce back when a problem hits. Imam al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala said, كَمَالُ السَّعَادَةِ فِي شَيْئَيْن. He said, ultimate happiness lies in two things. تَعْظِيمُ الْحَقِّ, honoring God, وَخِدْمَةُ الْخَلْقِ, and serving humans. So make sure that this purpose is set clear. And every time we're mentioning something that helps us build resilience, we'll have an exercise. So your soul and your heart will not connect with Allah and people unless you have less food, right? This is what we have been talking about, less food. So you skip a meal for a reason. So this means that we should learn how to break our fast. Many of us, we know how to fast, but very few of us know how to break the fast. So at Maghrib, they fill up their stomachs and they make up for what they missed during the daytime, and they have even health problems. That is why fasting does not change us. Why? Because we do not understand the purpose of skipping that meal. You're skipping that meal for more connection with Allah and to give that meal for someone who's literally hungry. You're not skipping a meal so that you make it up in Maghrib time. Imam al-Ghazali said, if you fast during the daytime and then you make up for that meal at sunset, what you're doing is كَمَنْ بَنَى قَصْرًا وَهَدَمَ مِصْرًا. It's like someone who built a palace but ruined a complete city. So, and he had something very beautiful to say here. He's saying, كيف يستفاد من الصوم قهر عدو الله وكسر الشهوة إذا تدارك الصائم عند فطره ما فاته ضحوة نهاره وربما يزيد عليه في ألوان الطعام. He said, how could fasting lead to defeating the enemy of Allah, the shaitan, and breaking your desires if you're making up for the food you're missing during the daytime? And he said, or even you eat extra types of food. He said, حتى جرت العادة بأنه يدخر جميع الأطعمة لرمضان فيؤكل فيه ما لا يؤكل في غيره في عدة أشهر. He said, even people nowadays at his time would store up food for Ramadan, and they end up eating in Ramadan more than in any other month. It seems that this bad habit is very old. So if you really want to learn spiritually from the month of Ramadan, you have to manage and control what you eat. During your breakfast, make sure you follow the following steps. The first one, again, we'll be talking about how to break the fast. Number one, Ease your body back into the process of digesting regular food. How you ease it? You ease the process back. The Prophet ﷺ, as we know, used to eat rutabat, like or tamr, or if he doesn't have these dates, he would just drink some water. So this is the first step you should do. The second is to have a break and some exercise. I would say pray Maghrib. Pray Maghrib. So after you break your fast with water and dates, pray Maghrib. And then have regular meal. Some people delay that meal till after Taraweeh. But if you want to eat, make sure that you eat your regular meal as if you were not fasting. If you overeat during Ramadan, then you will be missing all of these great benefits we're talking about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. Eat and drink, and do not eat in excess, because Allah does not like those who eat excessively. Does not like them. Imam al-Razi said this is a threat, because when Allah does not like some people, they may not receive His mercy, and they may be prone to receive His punishment. So the idea of overeating could be considered as a sin here. إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. If at home you have food left over from yesterday, do not throw it in the garbage. Make sure you eat it. One day my wife was saying, what should we do with this food? I said, I'll eat that piece of fish, and you eat that piece of meat, and that is it. We don't have to cook today. If Ramadan turns to be, and I know I am talking against the norms now, but the problem is, it's really a big problem. That is why we do not benefit from fasting. I know ladies would love these ideas, but I'm not making it. If you like this, do it for yourself. Do it only for yourself. Let the whole family enjoy the old ways, but do it for yourself. Make sure that you do not overeat during the iftar, so that you still maintain that connection of your soul with Allah and of your heart with people. And remember that one big challenge is to maintain this idea of undivided heart that is devoted to Allah. When you overeat, khalas, do not talk to me about Taraweeh or even breathing. So there is no chance to be able to breathe, rather than let alone benefiting spiritually. So mention 3 points. Number 4, avoid soda and sweet and all of these things, because it could easily lead to laziness. And number 5, make the best use of that, of the softness of your heart that comes because of hunger and less food, and use that in dua. Imam Abu Sulaiman al-Darani said, when you overeat, you suffer from 6 problems. The first one is فقد حلاوة المناجاة. You lose the sweetness of communication with Allah. And second, حرمان الشفقة على الخلق. You will be deprived of having compassion for people. He said, because when you're full, you think that everyone else is full. Number 3, ثقل العبادة. So you will see worship as a burden. زيادة الشهوات. The desires will be increased. And this is what the opposite of what fasting should be doing. Fasting is supposed to help you control the desires. And if you can do that for 30 days, it will be easy for you to make new habits and break bad old habits. So these are 2 points that would help us build resilience. The first one is that we understand that life is difficult, and we embrace that fact. And fasting is an exercise that helps us cope with this. The second is that we have a bigger purpose in this dunya, and the bigger purpose of a Muslim is two things: honoring Allah and serving people. Basically, no, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I created the jinn and the ins for nothing but to worship me. Worship here means to know. Knowing, and when you know Allah, you love Allah. When you love Allah, you worship Allah. So knowing, loving, and worshiping, that is one. And the second is amara, cultivating this dunya. And as I said in short, honoring Allah and serving people. Number 3, one thing we learned from fasting is that breaking the fast at Maghrib is a reminder of developing hope that any problem you will be facing will be over. Exactly as your suffering during the daytime of Ramadan is over at sunset. So this is the climax of every day of fasting. You receive hope at Maghrib. This is when the problem is lifted, and when the trials and the trauma we're facing are over. There is a very beautiful poem called Al-Munfarija by Imam Ibn al-Nahwi. This can be taught in how to manage depression and trauma. It's very, very beautiful. He said, اشتدي أزمة تنفرجي. He said, he's addressing the trouble and the trauma, saying, get worse, O trouble, so that you will be lifted. قد آذن ليلك بالبلج يعني بالضياء. Because your night has announced the breaking of the dawn. But this is really, really very powerful. He is owning the trauma. He's not owned by it. He's addressing it. He's saying, get worse. Because when you get worse, this is like the darkest point of the night, which is usually followed by the dawn. So if you get worse, this is the point when I love. Because this is the time when I will receive, again, this is the idea of developing hope. That no matter how the situation gets worse, what is expected and what we're waiting for is the breaking of the dawn. You remember قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ? It's the same exact concept. Al-Falaq, literally, the Lord who splits things. So anything that comes because of splitting is called falaq. So the rain is falaq, because it comes after breaking the clouds. Water coming from the springs is falaq. The dawn coming after breaking the night is falaq. That is why the one who made these changes is the one that we're praying that he would bring changes and transformation in our life. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. That is why human and problem and evil is mentioned in this ayah. We're seeking help from the Lord of Al-Falaq, who brings these changes to bring changes in our life. So Ibn al-Nahwi says, continues saying, وَظَلَامُ اللَّيْلِ لَهُ سُرُجٌ. The darkness of the night has gleams. حَتَّى يَغْشَاهُ أَبُو السُّرُجِ. Till Abu Suruj is the sun, the Shams, till the sun overwhelms the whole earth. What he's trying to say is darkness is usually relieved and trauma is usually relieved gradually. He said, even though it's all darkness at night, but still there are some gleams. And usually when we wait, the sun will rise and it will turn into complete light. And the last the last line I want to share with you is وَسَحَابُ الْخَيْرِ لَهُ مَطَرٌ. The dark clouds has rain. فَإِذَا جَاءَ الْإِبَّانُ يَجِي. When it is time, the rain will come when its due time. The point here again is we face difficulties in life, and one way to build resilience is to have that hope. When you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, it it can be easily called a story of hope. Because the Prophet ﷺ is assigned to change people from idolatry, worshipping the idols, into monotheism, changing their social system, their economic system, their political system, literally everything. Imagine how hard it is to be assigned to change someone's bad habit like smoking. How much does it take? And how much effort do you need? Now you want to change people's beliefs, and those people are very courageous and very generous, so they can kill you for that, and they can spend all of their time for that, and all of their money. So for you to think that the change is possible, you must really have great hope. That is why the Quran, and this is very important, the Quran makes Muslims see victory. In Mecca, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, سَيُهْزَمُ الْجَمْعُ وَيُوَلُّونَ الدُّبُرِ. The multitudes, referring to the armies of the polytheists, of the mushrikun, they will be defeated and they will give you their back. This was mentioned when? At the time when Muslims were completely persecuted and tortured. But the Quran wants them to see that they will receive victory. If you have the ability and if you can visualize that hope, that helps you build more resilience. Because after the darkness, the darkest point at the night, the day will follow. So to build more resilience, fasting is telling you it's a matter of time. Sunset will come soon. Sunset here is the time of breaking, when the suffering is over. Sunset will come soon. So avoid any negative self-talk to yourself during times of difficulty. Replace it with positive self-talk. Because these positive self-talk affects you literally. I remember someone, it was in Umrah, someone was having some emotional problems. So I told him, we should start with one fact. And I'll do an experiment with you now to prove to you that it's important. What is the experiment? I told him that these emotional thoughts you're having could literally affect you physically. And if I proved that, I think it's worthwhile to relax and think about a solution. He said, how can it afford me physically? I said, you literally look very tired. So I said, okay, imagine, and this is from a book of tafsir by Imam al-Razi. He said, imagine if you have, we can all do this. Close your eyes. Mashi. Imagine you have a lemon, and now break it into 2 halves. Now put one in your mouth. What do you feel? Sour? But there is no knife. There is no lemon. There is nothing. It's just thoughts. Right? Did you notice that? So sometimes we suffer physically because of things that are not real. Your brain does not differentiate between what is real and what is not. So make sure that you have hope. Make sure that you entertain hope in life. Make sure that you have positive self-talk. And this is Imam al-Razi. He died in 606 of Hijrah. 606 هجرية. طيب, we'll move to number 4. Number 4. How does fasting help us build resilience? Fasting helps us develop an attitude of gratitude. Fasting helps us develop an attitude of gratitude. What is the most precious thing when the mu'adhin says Allahu Akbar at Maghrib? What is the most precious thing you would have when the mu'adhin says Allahu Akbar at Maghrib? Water and dates. So now, good. Pure water and dates. Sahih. So you get to appreciate little things in your life, and that is a key. Sometimes when we face difficulties, we tend to forget the blessings in our life. And we focus on what we missed rather than what we have. So fasting comes to remind you, Allah is keeping you away from these good things so that you get to appreciate them. So that you would deal with everything you have as special gifts from Allah to you. Can you please write that down? Allah wants you to recognize that everything you have is a special gift to you. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, you can say he's a psychiatrist. He was talking about ingratitude and why some people are ungrateful. And he was trying to see what would be the reasons. He said, for example, you have eyes that you cannot trade for millions. So why do we forget to be grateful? He was concerned with that question. One of the reasons he mentioned was لأن هذه النعم مبذولة للناس جميعا فلا يرى الإنسان فيها وجه اختصاص. He said the reason why we are ungrateful is because we think that these blessings, the blessing of the eyes, are available for everybody, so we do not feel special. He said in order to be grateful, you need to deal with every blessing as something special to you. Deal with that cup of water as something special to you. Deal with that, with the breathing as something special to you. I told you the story of Harun al-Rashid before. He was that great king, and he had Ibn al-Sammak, his advisor. And Harun al-Rashid got thirsty, so he asked for some water, and the water was brought immediately to the king. And Ibn al-Sammak, his advisor, said, can I have a request? He said, go ahead. He said, imagine before you drink that water, imagine if you cannot find water anywhere. How much money would you be ready to pay so that you get that cup of water? He said, I will pay half of my wealth. He said, drink it. May Allah make it healthy for you. And after he was done, he said, can I have one more question? Imagine if you cannot release that water from your body. How much money would you pay? He said, all of my wealth. Because as we're sitting now, there are some people in hospitals because they cannot use the bathroom in the way we do. So he said, do not rejoice that much because all of your whole kingdom is not worth a cup of water. Again, it may not make sense when a problem hits and I remind you of the good gifts that you have. That is why I said we need to be armed before a problem happens. If someone lost a child, I think it may not be appropriate if I say, do not worry, you have another child. And it is important to learn how to give condolences to people because sometimes we say offensive things without meaning it. But this is the point. You have to recognize this on your own. The best examples to illustrate this, and you can say this is divine counseling, comes from Surah Alam Nashrah. Surah Al-Sharh. Alam Nashrah. Surah, I think 94. So in Surah Alam Nashrah, the Prophet ﷺ is feeling very, Jazakallah khairan, is feeling very, I don't want to say depressed, but by the way, it's not bad if you feel emotionally down. It's not haram if you feel depressed. And it is not, what is haram is you surrender to that and you do not seek help. But the feeling itself is fine. And the feeling itself does not mean you have lack of faith. That is not true. Yaqub alayhi salam, for example, his eyes turned white because of how much he was crying for Yusuf, right? فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. He's full of sorrow. Maryam said, يَا لَيْتَنِي مِتُّ قَبْلَ هَذَا. I wish I had died before this. وَكُنْتُ نَسْيًا مَنْسِيًّا. And I was not known at all. And the Prophet ﷺ was told in the Quran, فَلَا تَذْهَبْ نَفْسُكَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَسَرَاتٍ. Do not grieve to death because of them. But the challenge is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Do not be weakened and do not grieve. It is that weakened, it is that weakness that makes grieving haram. Grieving could take whatever time it takes, and it differs from one person to another. But when you grieve to the point when you are weakened, يعني it's like you become disabled, you abandon people. This is when it becomes dangerous. And you have to literally seek help. And you cannot surrender to this type of trauma. That is why the Prophet ﷺ needed help. The burden of da'wah was very weighty on him. ﷺ. As I said, he's charged with and entrusted with bringing big changes that no one could afford. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Sharh said, أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ. And listen to this soft way of addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ. Haven't we expanded your chest for you, relieved you? أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ. And relieved you of the load on your back. الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ ظَهْرَكَ. That broke your back. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. And we elevated your mention. Now, if you want to personalize the surah, replace these 4 blessings with 4 blessings in your life. And then the next step that the surah takes is فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. With every hardship comes ease. إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. With every hardship comes ease. Again, what is the second message? Embrace the reality of life. It is not all pain. It is a mixture of good and bad, sorrow and joy. And it comes with a matched set. As some scholars said, على قدر الأفراح تكون الأتراح. For as much as you have joy, you have equivalent sorrow related to that joy. So the point is, remember the blessings. The second is embrace the reality of life. The third is very interesting. In the beginning of the surah, you see someone like this, almost depressed. And at the end of the surah, it says, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. Where you're done with your daily activity, stand up in devotion to Allah. وَإِلَى رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. And turn to Allah with hope. So this is, he becomes active by the end of the surah. If you look at Surah إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرِ. Some people, after Ibrahim passed away, the son of the Prophet ﷺ, he was around 18 months. And the Prophet ﷺ was more than 50 years old. And every time he gets a child, a son, he dies. And this child survives till he was 18 months, and then he died. People, instead of giving condolences for the Prophet, or at least staying silent, they were making fun of him. Can you imagine this? Saying he's al-abtar. He's someone who doesn't have surviving kids. They are saying it in a very offensive way. So the Prophet ﷺ, as regular humans, felt hurt because of these remarks. And they are saying he doesn't have surviving kids because they said, "Khalas, don't worry about Muhammad ﷺ, because he doesn't have people to carry on his message. And his message will be finished on its own." But the Quran sent this surah, إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرِ. Indeed, we have given you the abundance of blessings in the afterlife and blessings in this dunya. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. So pray to your Lord and slaughter and sacrifice the camels, meaning to feed people. And at the end it says, the one who's إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرِ. The one who hates you is the abtar. And abtar here is used to mean the one who doesn't have surviving good. But it started with what? Awakening the Prophet's heart to the blessings he has and duty. What is his duty? Pray, and pray to Allah and serve people. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was around 18 months. And the Prophet ﷺ was more than 50 years old. And every time he gets a child, a son, he dies. And this child survives till he was 18 months. And then he died. People, instead of giving condolences for the Prophet, or at least staying silent, they were making fun of him. So When you are in the middle of difficulties and you start serving people, volunteering, this is a time that the trauma is over, or at least you're coping with it. So as I said, in the beginning you see someone almost depressed, and at the end of the surah you see someone socially engaged with people. So this is how, if these things do not work, then you should understand that the Prophet needed counseling, and that counseling came from Allah. It's not wrong to seek counseling if what I am saying doesn't change you. So, and that is really, really, very, very important. Many surahs in the Quran are dedicated just for that purpose. Stories, لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, to strengthen your heart. It's not to give you new information. Number 5, Ramadan is not just about fasting. Ramadan is also about giving. Actually, the two Eids are also about giving. Ramadan is about giving. We have Sadaqatul Fitr. In the last few days of Ramadan, we give Sadaqatul Fitr. And Ramadan is generally fasting and giving and praying. They say in Arabic, أسعد الناس من أسعد الناس. If you want to be happy, make someone else happy. So if you're going through some difficulties, make sure that you get out of bed and go volunteering and have some social time with people. Do some work to serve others. That could be a source of relief for us. So helping people, as I said, and volunteering are signs that you are not depressed, or at least you're coping with it. Number 6, what does fasting do? Fasting creates community connections. Fasting creates community connections. Connections during the iftar, connections during Taraweeh. So this is very good in building resilience. We are social beings. It's impossible for us to survive alone, whether spiritually or emotionally. Spiritually, we cannot survive alone. I love this gathering, not because I think you will be receiving new pieces of information. No, your physical presence itself is a blessing. Getting together, getting to know, you create your own group is a blessing in itself. Coming to the masjid on a weekly basis with few people you love, few people you surround yourself with, is a blessing in itself. Even if you do not receive that much education. Because that helps you build resilience, spiritually and emotionally. Spiritually, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, guide us unto the straight path. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. How did Allah define the path? He said, the path of those you have blessed. He didn't say, guide us to the straight path, the path of fasting, prayer, and giving. No, he defined the path by telling you about the people who follow it. So you should surround yourself with them. He said, حتى يزول عنه تفرده بين أهل زمانه. He said, so that you will not feel lonely, basically. And sometimes we feel spiritually lonely if you do not connect with your group. And if emotionally we could feel down if we do not have that supporting network and group that helps us bounce back from setbacks. These 6 points I mentioned would build resilience. Resilience does not mean you do not you're not ruined by the trials, but actually the trials could be a reason to grow. And I would like to close in these last 2 minutes with this idea. that not only you will be able to bounce back, but you will be able to grow because of that trial. The Prophet ﷺ gave us a very good parable that explains this. He said, a believer is like al-khama min al-zara, is like fresh small plants. When it is windy, what happens to these small plants? The wind moves it to the right and to the left. It's very flexible. It goes with the wind. And that is a reason for these small plants to grow. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, and a hypocrite is like a big, hard tree. When it is windy, it could be uprooted all at once. So these little plants survived and grow, and that big, hard tree was broken at once. Why? Because of that sense of flexibility. It is like the malleable iron. When you hammer it, it doesn't necessarily break it, but it could reframe it. Reframe it in a way that makes it more valuable. That piece of iron could be $1, but when it is reframed, it could be a lot more expensive. So sometimes these tests comes to do this. And we know many stories of people that they turned the trials into triumph because of that attitude, because of that type of resilience. So as I said, I talked about fasting in many different ways. There was one Seeking Shade program where I talked about fasting and how to change bad habits through fasting. And now we're talking about fasting and building resilience. So these are great seasons of worship. And I want to close with this word. Your job in Ramadan is to reset and reboot your spiritual mind. How can we achieve that? When you have inqita' and devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an undivided heart. ماشي يا شباب وجزاكم الله خيرا أجمعين.